I slammed my palm against the security guard's chest, my voice breaking. "That's my father in there. You can't do this." The guard didn't budge. Behind him, my stepmother Victoria stood perfectly still, her manicured nails resting on her designer purse. Her eyes held something I'd never seen before, satisfaction mixed with cold calculation. "He doesn't want to see you, Nolan," she said, her voice smooth as ice. "You've caused him enough stress." Through the hospital room door, I heard my father cough, weak, struggling, desperate. That sound tore through me like broken glass. I lunged forward again, but two guards moved in, forming a wall between me and the only parent I had left. "Please," I begged, my chest heaving. "He's dying. I need to say goodbye." Victoria stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming. She leaned in, her lips curling into the faintest smile. "You should have thought about that before you abandoned him." My hands trembled. I'd never abandoned anyone. This was a lie, a twisted story she'd been feeding everyone for months. But standing there, blocked by hired muscle while my father fought for his last breaths, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't petty cruelty. This was strategy. My name is Nolan Whitaker. Before I go on, let me know you're here. Drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It still amazes me how far one story can travel. And if you like stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I grew up believing family meant protection, love, unconditional trust. My father taught me that. He was a good man, a builder who started with nothing and created an empire through sweat and honesty. When my mother died, I was 12. It was just him and me against the world. Then Victoria appeared. She was elegant, charming, 20 years younger than my father. She swept into our lives like a fairy tale, and my father, lonely and grieving, fell hard. They married when I was 16. At first, I wanted to believe she loved him, but even then, I saw the cracks. She'd smile at him during dinner, but her eyes were always calculating, measuring. She'd ask about his business with too much interest, about his properties, his investments. She kept lists of everything he owned, every account, every asset. My father was too in love to notice. Or maybe he noticed and chose to ignore it. Either way, I watched her carefully from the beginning, and what I saw in those early years was just a preview of the monster she'd become. 2 days after my father died, I stood outside Riverside Funeral Home, staring at the locked doors. The funeral director, Mr. Palmer, avoided my eyes. He was a small man with nervous hands, and right now those hands were shaking. "I'm sorry, Nolan," he said quietly. "I can't let you in. Can't." I repeated, my voice hollow. "My father is in there. His body is in there. You can't stop me from seeing him." Mr. Palmer glanced over my shoulder. I turned. Victoria stood near her black Mercedes, arms crossed, watching like a queen observing her subjects. She wore all black, pearls glinting at her throat, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "She gave explicit instructions," Mr. Palmer whispered. "Family only, and according to her, you're not family anymore." The words hit me like a fist to the gut. Not family. My father's only son. The boy he raised, taught to fish, to build, to be a man. And now I wasn't family. Victoria walked closer, her heels clicking on the pavement. She stopped just out of reach, tilting her head. "You weren't there when he needed you," she said softly. "Why should you be here now?" She turned and walked inside. The door locked behind her. I stood there, frozen, as the sky turned gray above me. That night, I broke into my father's study. Not literally, I still had a key from when I lived there. But it felt like breaking in, sneaking through the house that should have been mine, avoiding the housekeeper Victoria had hired. The study smelled like him. Old books, leather, cedar. I sank into his chair and stared at the desk, my throat tight. Papers were scattered everywhere, bills and contracts and notes in his shaky handwriting. Victoria had already started cleaning out his things, boxing up his life like it meant nothing. I searched through drawers, desperate for anything that could help me. Legal documents, bank statements, something that proved I still mattered. My hands shook as I rifled through folders. Then I found it. A letter, tucked inside an old Bible he kept on the bottom shelf. My name was written on the envelope in his handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Nolan," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if Victoria is causing trouble, remember the offshore accounts. The ones I set up in the Cayman Islands. Account numbers in the safe. Code is your mother's birthday. Don't let her take everything. You're my son. You're my legacy." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. She had no idea these accounts existed. Victoria hosted a family dinner 3 weeks after the funeral. She called it a gathering to honor your father's memory. I knew what it really was, a performance, a chance for her to cement her control. I sat at the far end of the long dining table, surrounded by distant relatives and family friends who barely knew me anymore. Victoria sat at the head, radiant in a navy dress, playing the grieving widow perfectly. "Nolan was always so distant," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Even when his father begged him to visit, he was too busy with his own life. Lies. Complete lies. I'd tried to visit dozens of times, but she'd always had an excuse. Dad was resting. Dad was with the doctors. Dad didn't want to be disturbed. I heard he didn't even come to the hospital at the end," someone murmured. Victoria sighed dramatically. "I tried to reach him, but you know how young people are these days." My jaw clenched. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to expose her in front of everyone. But I didn't. I sat there, silent, watching. Because across the table, my father's old business partner, Mr. Hendricks, was watching her too. And in his eyes, I saw doubt. That was all I needed. I met the lawyer in a small office downtown, the kind of place that didn't advertise. His name was Robert Callahan, 50-something, gray hair, sharp eyes. He'd been recommended by Mr. Hendricks, who'd quietly slipped me his card at the dinner. "Tell me everything," Callahan said, leaning back in his chair. I told him. The hospital, the funeral home, the dinner, the lies. I told him about Victoria's manipulations, the way she'd isolated my father in his final months, the will that suddenly appeared, leaving everything to her. Callahan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he tapped his pen against his desk. "She made mistakes," he said. "Arrogant people always do. They think they're untouchable." "Can we fight this?" I asked. "We can," he said, "but it won't be fast, and it won't be easy. We'll need evidence, documents, witnesses, anything that proves she manipulated your father or forged signatures." I thought about the letter, the offshore accounts. "I have something," I said. "Bank accounts she doesn't know about. My father left me instructions." Callahan smiled for the first time. "Then we have leverage. And leverage, Nolan, is everything." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The bank manager's face went pale when I showed him the documents. We were sitting in a private room at First National, the same bank my father had used for 30 years. The manager, Mr. Torres, had known my father personally. "These accounts," he said slowly, reviewing the papers. "They were opened 8 years ago. Substantial deposits every quarter." "And the withdrawals?" I asked. He scrolled through his computer, frowning. "There was a large withdrawal attempted 2 weeks ago. Signature authorization required. It was denied. Why? Because the signature didn't match our records." He looked up at me. "Someone tried to forge your father's signature to access these funds." My heart raced. "Do you have documentation?" "Everything's recorded. Signature samples, transaction attempts, dates and times." I leaned back, trying to keep my expression neutral. But inside I was smiling. Victoria had tried to steal from accounts she didn't even know existed, and she'd left a paper trail. "I'll need copies of everything," I said. Mr. Torres nodded. "I'll have them ready by tomorrow." When I walked out of that bank, the sun felt warmer. The air felt lighter. She was going to regret underestimating me. Victoria had wormed her way into my father's company, Bennett and Whitaker Construction. She'd convinced the board to make her a consultant, which really meant she showed up to meetings and acted important. But she didn't understand the business. She didn't understand the people. I did. I'd grown up on those construction sites, learning from my father, earning the respect of the crews. So when I quietly reached out to some of the longtime employees, they listened. "She's been spreading rumors," said Danny, the site foreman. "We were sitting in his truck during lunch break, saying you abandoned your dad, that you're unreliable, that the company's better off without you." "What do people think?" I asked. Danny shrugged. "Most people remember you as a kid running around with your hard hat. They know you cared about your old man. They don't trust her." "Good," I said. "Keep me updated if she says anything else." "Will do." 2 days later, Danny called me. "You're not going to believe this. Victoria's assistant, some girl named Rachel, was talking at lunch. Said Victoria's planning to sell the company." I gripped the phone. "Sell it?" That's what Rachel said. Some big developer's been sniffing around. My father had built that company from nothing, and Victoria wanted to sell it for a quick payout. Not if I had anything to say about it. I sat in my father's hospital room, even though he wasn't there anymore. The nurses had let me in after visiting hours, recognizing me from before. The bed was empty, sheets crisp and white, machines silent. I remembered sitting here 3 months ago, holding his hand. He'd been so weak, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't let her dim your fire," he'd said, squeezing my fingers. "You're stronger than you know." I hadn't understood what he meant then. I thought he was just rambling, confused by the medication. But now I understood. He'd known. He'd known what Victoria was, what she'd try to do after he was gone. And he'd tried to warn me. Tears burned my eyes. I'd never gotten to say goodbye. Never told him I loved him one last time. Victoria had stolen that from me. But she hadn't stolen everything. I had his letter. I had the accounts. I had people who believed in me. And I had his fire. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and walked out of that room with my head high. This wasn't just about money or the company. This was about honoring him. Mr. Hendricks lived in a quiet neighborhood, a modest house with a well-kept garden. He invited me in for coffee, settling into his armchair with a sigh. "Your father was my best friend for 25 years, he said. "I watched you grow up, and I'm telling you, Nolan, something wasn't right at the end." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Victoria controlled everything. Who could visit? Who could call? She even intercepted his mail. I tried to see him a few times, but she always had an excuse." He shook his head. "Your father would never have cut you out. Never." "Did you see the will?" I asked. "I did. She showed it to me, all proud. Everything goes to her. The house, the company, the accounts. Your name isn't mentioned once." "That doesn't sound like him." "It doesn't," Hendricks agreed, "and I told her that. She just smiled and said your father had his reasons." I leaned forward. "What if I told you I found accounts she doesn't know about, and evidence that she tried to forge his signature?" Hendricks' eyes widened. "You have proof?" "I do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "Your father would be proud." "Will you help me?" I asked. "If this goes to court, I'll need people who knew him, who can testify to his real character." "Absolutely," Hendricks said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." When I left his house, I felt the pieces falling into place. Victoria called me 2 months after the funeral. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Nolan, darling, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't we meet for lunch? Clear the air?" I knew it was a trap, but I also knew I needed to hear what she'd say. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and wine lists thicker than novels. Victoria was already there, sipping champagne, looking like she owned the place. "I'm so glad you came," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "I've been worried about you." "Have you?" I said flatly. "Of course. Your family." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know things have been difficult, but your father wouldn't want us fighting." "My father wouldn't want a lot of things," I said. She ignored that. "I've been thinking, maybe we can come to an arrangement. I know you feel entitled to something from the estate. What if I gave you a small settlement? Enough to get you started in life." "A settlement," I repeated. "Yes, say 50,000. That's more than generous, considering." "Considering what?" I interrupted. "Considering you blocked me from seeing him? Considering you kept me out of his funeral?" Her smile tightened. "You're being dramatic." I leaned back, watching her. "I'm being realistic, and I'm not interested in your settlement." Her eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, standing up, "but it's my mistake to make." I walked out, leaving her sitting there. And in my pocket, my phone recorded every word she'd said. Callahan's office smelled like coffee and old paper. He spread the documents across his desk, bank records, signature analyses, transaction logs, everything we'd gathered over the past 2 months. "The offshore accounts are the key," he said. "Your father set them up legally, with clear instructions that you're the beneficiary. Victoria had no legal claim to them." "But she tried to access them," I said. "She did, and that's where she made her mistake." He tapped the signature analysis report. "This proves she attempted to forge your father's signature. That's fraud, Nolan. Criminal fraud." "Can we use this in court?" "Absolutely. Combined with witness testimony about her controlling behavior and the suspicious circumstances around the will, we have a strong case to challenge her claim to the estate. I felt a surge of energy. When do we file? Soon. But first, I want to secure the offshore accounts in your name, legally and officially. That way, even if the estate case drags on, you'll have financial security. How long will that take? A few weeks, maybe less. He smiled. Patience, Nolan. We're building a case she can't fight. I nodded, but patience was hard when every day she walked around acting like she'd won. Still, I trusted Callahan, and I trusted my father's plan. The family gathering was at Victoria's house, my father's house, really, but she acted like she'd always owned it. It was a birthday party for her sister, and somehow I'd been invited, probably so she could humiliate me again. I showed up anyway. The house was full of people I barely knew, Victoria's friends and relatives, all dressed in expensive clothes and drinking expensive wine. I moved through the crowd, invisible, until Victoria spotted me. "Oh, Nolan," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm so glad you could make it. How's the job search going?" I didn't have a job. She knew that. She'd made sure of it, spreading rumors in my father's business circles. "It's going well," I said calmly. "Really? I heard you've been struggling. Such a shame. Your father always worried you couldn't make it on your own." People were staring now, whispering. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in my chest. But then I saw Victoria's daughter, Emily, watching from across the room. She was 19, quiet, always uncomfortable at these events, and she was frowning at her mother. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I've been consulting with some of Dad's old business partners. They've been really supportive." Victoria's smile faltered, just for a second. "How nice," she said, and turned away. Later, Emily found me on the patio. "She's lying, you know," Emily said quietly. "About you, about everything." I looked at her. "You believe me?" "I believe my eyes," she said, "and I've seen how she operates." That was the moment I realized Victoria's own family was starting to see through her. Callahan filed the challenge to the will on a Tuesday morning. It was quiet, undisclosed, just a legal document submitted to the probate court. Victoria wouldn't know about it until the court sent her official notice. "Now we wait," Callahan said. "The court will review our petition and they'll schedule a hearing." "How long?" 4 to 6 weeks. I paced his office. "That's a long time." "It's standard. But Nolan, this is good. We have time to gather more evidence, line up witnesses, build an airtight case. What if she tries something in the meantime? She might. But legally, she can't touch the offshore accounts now. They're frozen pending the outcome of the case." That was something, at least. Over the next few weeks, I focused on gathering support. I talked to my father's friends, his employees, anyone who'd witnessed Victoria's behavior. Most people were willing to help, eager even. "Your dad was a good man," one contractor told me. "He didn't deserve what she did to him." I documented everything: dates, times, conversations. I recorded phone calls where Victoria's friends accidentally revealed things she'd said in private. Slowly, methodically, I built a case that couldn't be ignored. And when the court finally sent Victoria her notice, I imagined her face when she opened it. That image kept me going. Victoria's allies were crumbling. I didn't have to do much, just plant small seeds of doubt and let them grow. I'd mentioned to one person that Victoria had tried to access accounts she didn't own. That person would tell someone else. Soon, whispers spread through my father's social circle. Is it true she forged signatures? I heard she kept Nolan from seeing his father. She's selling the company without consulting the board. Each rumor had a kernel of truth, and that made them impossible to dismiss completely. Victoria tried to fight back, hosting dinners and events, playing the victim. But people were starting to ask questions. Why didn't Nolan get anything in the will? Isn't that strange for an only child? Even her closest friends seemed uncertain now. I watched it all from a distance, documenting the shift. Victoria's social empire, built on charm and manipulation, was showing cracks. And the more she tried to control the narrative, the more desperate she looked. Mr. Hendricks called me one evening. "People are talking. She's losing support." "Good," I said. "Be careful, Nolan. Cornered animals are dangerous." I knew he was right, but I was ready. Rachel was Victoria's personal assistant, a young woman who handled her schedule, emails, and personal affairs. I'd never spoken to her directly, but I knew she saw everything. She contacted me through a private email. "We need to talk," it said. "Coffee tomorrow? I have information you need." I met her at a small cafe across town. She looked nervous, glancing around like she expected Victoria to appear. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because I can't do this anymore," she said. "I've watched her lie, manipulate, destroy people. Your father was kind to me. He didn't deserve what she did." "What did she do?" Rachel pulled out a folder. Inside were printed emails, text messages, calendar entries. She planned everything. Months before your father died, she was already meeting with lawyers about the will. She convinced him you didn't care, that you'd abandoned him. I felt sick. How? She intercepted your calls, deleted your messages, told him you were too busy to visit. He believed her because he was sick, confused, vulnerable. My hands shook as I read through the documents. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture. Calculated, deliberate manipulation. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. "Because it's the right thing to do," Rachel said. "And because she's planning to fire me anyway. I heard her on the phone yesterday." I looked at her. "Thank you." "Use it well," she said. I did. Late at night, alone in my apartment, I broke down. The grief I'd been holding back for months finally overwhelmed me. I cried for my father, for the goodbye I never got, for the time Victoria had stolen from us. I cried for the boy I used to be, the one who believed families protected each other. But after the tears dried, something else settled in. Clarity. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle anymore. This was about making sure my father's legacy meant something, about ensuring the people he'd built his life with, his employees, his friends, his true family, weren't forgotten. Victoria wanted to erase him, sell his company, spend his money, and move on. I wouldn't let that happen. I pulled out the documents Rachel had given me and started organizing them. Every email, every text, every piece of evidence. I cross-referenced dates with my father's medical records, showing when he'd been most vulnerable. By morning, I had a timeline that proved everything. And I realized something important. Patience wasn't weakness. Patience was my deadliest weapon. The court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Callahan and I sat on one side of the courtroom, Victoria and her lawyer on the other. She looked confident, almost bored, like this was just an inconvenience. The judge reviewed our petition, then looked at Victoria's lawyer. "Counselor, your client is accused of manipulating medical documents to control visitation rights during the deceased's final illness. What's your response?" Victoria's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, these accusations are baseless. Mrs. Whitaker was simply following her husband's wishes." "Do you have documentation of those wishes?" the judge asked. "We have the will, Your Honor." "Anything else? Medical directives? Written instructions?" The lawyer hesitated. "Not specifically." Callahan stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Whitaker restricted all visitation to the deceased, including from his only son, without any written authorization. We also have testimony from medical staff that she claimed to speak for the patient despite no legal power of attorney." The judge looked interested now. "Continue." "Furthermore," Callahan said, "we have documented attempts by Mrs. Whitaker to access accounts she had no legal right to using forged signatures." Victoria's face went pale. "I'd like to see this evidence," the judge said. We presented everything, signature analyses, bank records, witness statements, and I watched Victoria's confidence crumble. The judge didn't rule immediately, but she granted a temporary order freezing all estate assets until a full hearing could be conducted. That meant Victoria couldn't sell the company, couldn't access the main accounts, couldn't do anything without court approval. Outside the courtroom, Victoria grabbed my arm. "You're going to regret this." I looked at her hand until she let go. "No, Victoria, you're going to regret underestimating me." She stormed off, her lawyer hurrying after her. Callahan smiled. "That went well." "It's not over," I said. "No, but it's a start." The temporary order meant I had access to family funds for living expenses. Not much, but enough. More importantly, it meant Victoria couldn't make any major moves. She was furious. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd screamed at her lawyer for an hour after the hearing, demanding to know how this had happened. The answer was simple. She'd gotten sloppy, arrogant. She'd assumed I'd give up, disappear, accept whatever scraps she offered. She'd been wrong. And now, for the first time in months, I had the upper hand. The next family event was a disaster for Victoria. It was a charity gala she'd organized, supposedly in my father's memory. She'd planned to give a speech, accept donations, play the grieving widow, but word had spread about the court case, about the accusations, about the evidence. People who'd once fawned over her now kept their distance. Conversations stopped when she approached. Smiles were forced, polite but cold. I watched from across the room as she tried to work the crowd, her frustration growing with each lukewarm response. At one point, she approached Mr. Hendricks, probably hoping for support. "I heard about the court case," he said bluntly. "Is it true you kept Nolan from seeing his father?" Victoria's smile faltered. "That's complicated." "It seems simple to me," Hendricks said. "Either you did or you didn't." She had no answer. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching her social foundation crack was satisfaction enough. By the end of the night, she left early, her face tight with barely controlled rage. Her empire was crumbling, and she knew it. I confronted Victoria in her office at the company. She'd been trying to maintain her consultant position, but the board was getting nervous about the legal issues. "We need to talk about the Cayman accounts," I said, closing the door behind me. She looked up from her desk, eyes narrowing. "What about them?" "You tried to access them, with forged signatures. I don't know what you're talking about." I placed the bank documents on her desk. "These say otherwise." She barely glanced at them. "That's ridiculous. I never—" "The bank has your signature attempts on file. Multiple attempts. All flagged as fraudulent." Her jaw clenched. "You're making this up." "Am I? Because the prosecutor's office might be interested in seeing these documents. Wire fraud is a federal crime, Victoria." She stood abruptly. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I said calmly. "You stole my last moments with my father. You humiliated me at his funeral. You tried to erase me from his legacy. What makes you think I wouldn't dare?" For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "The truth," I said. "In court, on record." She said nothing. I left her there, hands shaking, staring at the documents. The cracks in her armor weren't just visible anymore. They were breaking open. Victoria made one last desperate move. She tried to produce a new medical directive, supposedly signed by my father weeks before he died, giving her complete control over all his affairs. It appeared suddenly, conveniently, just before the major court hearing. Callahan reviewed it and smiled. "She's panicking." "Can she use this?" I asked. "She can try, but look at the signature." He pointed to the shaky scrawl at the bottom. "This was supposedly signed 2 weeks before your father died, but according to hospital records, he couldn't hold a pen at that point. His hands were too weak." We subpoenaed the hospital records and medical staff testimony. 3 nurses confirmed my father had lost fine motor control weeks before the alleged signature date. When we presented this in court, Victoria's lawyer looked sick. "Your Honor," Callahan said, "this document is clearly fabricated. We request an investigation into document forgery." The judge agreed. Victoria sat frozen in her seat, her face ashen. She'd walked into a trap, and she'd done it to herself. Her arrogance, her absolute certainty that she could manipulate anything, had finally destroyed her. The final hearing was packed. Word had spread through the community about the case. The wicked stepmother, the disinherited son, the forged documents. People wanted to see how it ended. The judge listened to weeks of testimony. Medical staff described Victoria's controlling behavior. Bank officials confirmed the forgery attempts. Rachel testified about the intercepted messages and deleted calls. Mr. Hendricks spoke about my father's true character and his love for me. Victoria's lawyer tried to fight back, but there was nothing left to fight with. Every defense crumbled under scrutiny. Every explanation sounded hollow. When the judge finally ruled, the courtroom went silent. "I find clear and convincing evidence that the will presented by Mrs. Whitaker was executed under duress and undue influence. Furthermore, Mrs. Whitaker's attempts to access accounts through forged signatures constitute fraud. I hereby void the contested will and restore the previous will, which names Nolan Whitaker as primary beneficiary." Victoria's face went white. "Additionally," the judge continued, "I'm referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges." It was over. I'd won, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, sad, and strangely empty. Justice wasn't joy. It was just closure. Reclaiming my inheritance took time. There were papers to sign, accounts to transfer, legal processes to complete. But eventually it was done. The house was mine. The company was mine. The accounts my father had carefully protected, all mine. But more than that, his memory was protected. The people he'd employed would keep their half jobs. The company he'd built wouldn't be sold off for parts. His legacy would continue. I stood in his study, the same room where I'd found his letter months ago. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. I'd honored him. I'd fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself, and I'd won. Victoria lost everything: the money, the house, the company, her social standing. She faced criminal charges for fraud. Her friends abandoned her. Even her own children questioned her actions. She destroyed herself through her own arrogance. I could have felt satisfaction, revenge, victory, but mostly I felt peace. I'd done what my father asked. I hadn't let her dim my fire. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I sold my father's company to a firm that promised to keep the employees and honor his vision. I kept the house, turning his study into a home office. The Cayman accounts secured my future. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was walking into a room and not feeling shame. It was knowing my worth wasn't defined by Victoria's lies. It was honoring my father's memory the right way. I still visit his grave every Sunday. I tell him about the company, about the people he loved who still remember him. I tell him I'm okay now. Victoria is gone from my life completely. Last I heard, she moved to another state, trying to rebuild somewhere people didn't know her story. I don't think about her anymore. She's irrelevant. What matters is that I learned something important through all of this. Family isn't about blood or legal documents. It's about who stands beside you when everything falls apart. It's about who believes in you when the world says you're nothing. I found my real family, Mr. Hendricks, Callahan, Rachel, even Emily, who eventually cut ties with her mother and rebuilt a relationship with me. They're the ones who matter. I'm Nolan Whitaker. I survived betrayal, fought for justice, and came out stronger. My father's fire burns bright inside me, and nothing, absolutely nothing, can take that away.